Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the spiritual books, the 10 spiritual books that inspired her the most on her life journey is globally recognized teacher, best-selling author, and thought leader on the topics of chakras, psychology, yoga, and social change, Dr. Anodea Judith. She's been called a prophet for our time, and her books have been translated into over 28 languages. Classics among those are Wheels of Life and Eastern Body, Western Mind. Dr. Anodea Judith, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, you have said that if you had an addiction, it would probably be to books. So tell us about your relationship with books.
Oh my goodness. My mother was a wannabe writer. And I remember at 6 years old getting up in the middle of the night and going to her typewriter, remember typewriters? And typing out of, because I wanted to write as well. And so I just love books and information. Every time I've moved, I've had to, cart a whole truck full of books and cart them around because they're like treasured friends that I don't want to let go of. And I love it when I'm writing and I can just say, what was that passage? And I can just go to my bookshelf and I can find it because I underline and I circle and I fold pages over and I make a mess of my books so they could never be resold anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of people feel exactly the same as you do. And it's interesting how people do see books as friends, really close friends. It's a bit like having a dog that you tell all your, your stories to. A lot of people do that as well. But books seem to have a life of their own.
Well, you spend a lot of time with an author's voice.
Yeah.
So you feel
Indeed.
you know the author quite well. They don't know you, but yeah.
Have you ever met any of the authors of some of your favorite books?
Oh, yes, indeed, I have. Some of the ones that I listed, Dwayne Elgin. In fact, I just had dinner with him last night. Leonard Shlain, I met on a few occasions, was at his house once. Who else do I have on my list here? I'm looking to the side. No, I never met Joseph Campbell
Ah,
or Meg Lee. Yeah, I think
is
that's
there
about it. Who
is
I've
there
met on my.
someone amongst your 10 books that you would have loved to have met?
Oh, I would love to have sat down with Joseph Campbell
Mm,
or Eric Yantz. They were just brilliant. I would have loved to have sat down with them. Yes.
yeah, yeah. It is always interesting when we meet the authors of our favorite books, I think, for the first time, because certainly in my case, I often get surprised because I've built a whole image for them, a whole identity based on the book. And sometimes they're nothing like that.
That's true. I met Gareth Hill. I listed him. What's the title again? I'm sorry. I'm masculine, feminine. And when I was working on my Global Heart book, I was using his material quite a bit. I thought I need to meet him and more than an email, ask permission to use it and tell him what I'm doing with that. So I tracked him down, and he was, very shy and withdrawn, and it was like not what I thought from the book, but very
Yeah.
introverted. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, astonishing. It's a bit like actors then. They can hide their personality behind the characters.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the first book on your list, and I'm assuming this is not necessarily in order of favourites or chronological, it's just 10 books, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so the first one is The Self-Organizing Universe, Scientific and Human Implications of the Emerging Paradigm of Evolution by Eric Jentz. And that was published in 1980. It sounds like a really serious book.
It is actually a really serious book. It's not for the faint of heart, but I actually love really serious books that I can just bite my teeth into and spend some time reading. And he is so brilliant. He actually committed suicide because his work wasn't accepted. At least that's what the story goes. And later, after his death, as it happens with so many, he was deemed to be a brilliant theorist about how the universe is organized, how evolution proceeds, and what self-organizing systems do, that we're not organized from the top down. We're organized naturally from the bottom up. And he took it from atoms and molecules and cells all the way up to the cosmic level and social organization, put it all together for me. And I went, wow.
So you understood it all.
I did understand it, most of it. There's some parts that are a little bit mathematical, like physics formulas. I kind of skipped over those. Mostly I'm interested in the social evolution. So I
Yeah,
spent most of my time on those chapters. Yeah.
yeah. Book number 2, Awakening Earth, Exploring the Evolution of Human Culture and Consciousness, Dwayne Elgin, published in 1993. I really like Dwayne's books.
Oh, I love all of Dwayne's books, and he is such a sweet man. I was at a dinner last night, and he sat right across from me, and so he's fresh in my mind. Um, he has such a love of the earth, of the environment, of nature, and an understanding that nature is alive and conscious. It is not a thing. We're like fleas on an elephant that don't know we're on a living animal. We're living, and the living universe is this saying that it has consciousness. And so he also goes through stages of human development, which I do in my Global Heart book. And that really affirmed the theories that I was developing. And so, yeah, Dwayne has been a great go-to author for me.
Yeah. The 3 additional stages of development that he wrote about that must still be realized. He said, if we're to become a planetary civilization that is able to endure into the distant future, and of course, this was written in 1993. What are they? Have they changed at all? Have we, in that period between 1993 and now, have we reached any of those stages of development?
Well, I think we are reaching them. And what he talks about, as well as I do, is that we are at an adolescent stage of our development. And that as adolescents, we're undergoing a planetary initiation. So the challenges of our time, climate change, and the social challenges, and the economic challenges, and the environmental challenges, they are humanity's initiation into a higher level of organization that is more in tune with the planet, more in tune with each other, that is organized with less waste. And so that we're still in that adolescent stage, but I think the initiation is progressing. So we're in the underworld part of the initiation.
And how long are we going to be in the underworld?
It's hard to say whether I will see in my lifetime us really come out the other side. I think it's a huge, huge transformation on every level of society that's going on. And I think it's going to, it's already happening. There's people waking up spiritually. There's people organizing differently. So it's not like it hasn't happened yet. It's a gradual thing. Part of it is dying. Part of it is being born. Creation and destruction are always happening simultaneously. Just now they're happening a little faster. When will we get out of the initiation and arrive at our planetary adulthood? I don't know, but I think the heart of the initiation is coming pretty soon in the next decade or two.
Yeah, it is both a very exciting and also, you use the Chinese phrase, interesting time to be alive.
Another of Dwayne's books, Choosing Earth, he goes through the different decades that are coming, and that this is the decade of unraveling, and then there's the 40 up to 2030. Then there's the decade of collapse, and then there's the decade of grieving, and then we come to the rebirth. So he charts that at around 2050, the rebirth.
Yeah, wow. Great news for the young. Also great news for the rest of us who won't be here to see it. Book number 3 this is a really interesting one. I had to tell a few of my friends to go and get this book. The Alphabet versus the Goddess, The Conflict Between Word and Image by Leonard Shlain. And this was published in 1999. And it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Well, Leonard Shlain is a fascinating character. He was a brain surgeon, and he taught at UCSF, I think, taught brain surgery. And so he researched consciousness and the brain, and he worked a lot with the right and left hemisphere and what the difference was. And of course, he saw things in his patients. And as he looked at that, he was also a student of history. And he looked at how when we became left brain dominant, which is pretty much what we are now. That's the logical mind. That's the more masculine thinking, intellectual writing. That everywhere that happened, everywhere the alphabet came along, not the pictorial alphabet, but the representational alphabet, that the social climate moved toward more masculine domination, and the feminine was lost. And so he correlates that through China, through the Americas, through European history. He looks at word and image. He looks at all these dualities that have happened, but everywhere the cultures became more misogynistic. And now the good news, and of course he died a few years ago and hasn't lived to really see like the Zoom now. We get more of our information from video and images than we do from the written word now. And that is actually bringing us back into the right brain, which is more feminine. Also, I think typing with 2 hands, which is what we do, nobody writes longhand anymore, also uses both sides of our brain. So it's a fascinating sweep of history and an understanding of consciousness and culture in these different stages.
Yeah. You know, you read so much in history. I remember Riane Eisler's Chariot and the Blade and, you know, her documentation of how we changed once we became agriculturalists and stopped
Yeah,
being hunter-gatherers. And then, you know, the whole gender thing changed as well. Our roles, we were no longer partners.
that's
Women
right.
were inferior. Um, I'd never come across this particular aspect of it, but I do recall reading a book many years ago in which somebody said when we developed language, we started to lose our ability for telepathy
Ah, yes.
because we were developing that left brain and we were beginning to ignore the right brain, you know, the intuitive brain. Um, yeah,
And
fascinating.
Leonard Klein would argue for that also in his book, you know. So,
Yeah.
but he actually put it in terms of the goddess cultures were lost as the masculine and the written word took over.
Mm. Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad it's
in
making.
China, that's when they began foot binding, you know, when they went from
And
a pictorial alphabet to representational.
I'll never understand why foot binding. You know, what made someone say feet, you know?
Well, they didn't want them to run away. It made it so hard to walk that the women couldn't run away. That was what it was all
I
about.
thought it was attractiveness,
Well, it was
you know?
that also. They thought that, you know, if they walked slowly and daintily, that that was more attractive. Yeah. It
Okay.
was
Well,
Empress
they,
Psyche who ruled for 50 years who put an end to that. She was a foot-bound concubine at 16 that married an emperor, and then the emperor died, and she took over and she ruled China for over 50 years. At the same time as Queen Victoria ruled, and those two women ruled more than half the population of the world in the late 1850s to 1900 phase.
and both ruled for very prolonged periods.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And Queen Victoria did it while raising 8 children.
Yeah.
Of course, she had
Yeah.
help.
Of course she did. Yeah. Okay. Number 4, masculine and feminine, the natural flow of opposites in the psyche by Gareth Hill, 2001.
Well, I have always been fascinated by masculine and feminine and the way it happens in the psyche, because I've been a therapist, and also in culture. And Gareth Hill talks, he's a Jungian, and he talks about the flow of opposites in the psyche having different stages of childhood development. For instance, when we're first born, we're more focused on the mother than we are on the father, you know, and we're in what he calls the static feminine. Everything centers around the mother. The baby can only go so far from the mother and still survive. And then the baby, you know, goes into the terrible twos and says no, and, you know, kind of overthrows the mother, so to speak, and goes into the rebellious stage. And that is the dynamic masculine. It's pushing against the mother. And then once they grow up, then they accept that sort of masculine. It's law and order and regulations. That's the static masculine. And then the final one is the dynamic feminine. But when I read that and I was researching history and I was reading Leonard Shlain and I was reading Dwayne Elgin and I was writing my book on the global heart, I went, oh, this theory applies to culture. When we were in the woods, we centered around the mother goddess and we didn't have much freedom. You know, it was dark when it was dark and it was light. We didn't travel, you know, more than 100 miles in our lifetime if we were lucky. That was the static feminine. Then the overthrow of the goddess was the dynamic masculine, the masculine taking over, overthrowing the mother, plowing the goddess religions underground. Then when the masculine took hold, like through the Roman Empire and the Christian era, it was law and order and regulations and intellectual distinctions. That was the static masculine. We're still in that, but the dynamic feminine is coming up and breaking all that up into a new order, more organized from the center. So when I saw Gareth Hill's work, I applied it to human history.
Wow. Never thought about it in that way. Yeah. Book number 5, Joseph Campbell, Power of Myth, published in 1988. You know, as you said, what's not to like in this classic treatise on the world's myths? Amazing.
Well, Joseph Campbell put mythology back on the map of human
Mm.
consciousness. And I have always argued that when we lived in a time of myth, we were missing the science. And so when we had science, we took a giant leap forward. But it was like taking a step from our left foot to our right foot. We stepped into science on our right foot, but we lost the myth. And if we don't have myth as part of the culture, we can't take the next step. Science tells us how and what, but myth tells us why. And so without guiding mythology, without guiding stories in the culture, we've lost our way. So we need myth and science together. And Joseph Campbell brings myth up, and his storytelling ability is just wonderful. And his research is so extensive. And he just brought something alive that would have been lost forever had it not been for him.
I am surprised that he does not appear more often on this book club, as people's choices. He doesn't even rank in the top 10.
Wow.
And that's really quite shocking, I think.
That is. Maybe people feel too overwhelmed by the tomes. It's not something that you read every word of. You open it and, you look up things and you read it here and there. It's got pictures. I think what's not to like? What's not to like?
Yeah. You said that it was a hard choice between this particular book and Hero with 1,000 Faces. What made you make the final decision?
I think that the Hero with 1,000 Faces is definitely a guiding myth for our time, but it is a largely masculine myth. And what we think about is the man going out and facing challenges, and that's the initiation. But the final step of that myth is the return home. And that is seldom emphasized, that the adventurer finds the elixir of healing and then brings it back to the alien community. And I think that's the step of the hero's journey we're on now, is how do we bring our scientific discoveries back home, like to solve the climate crisis? How do we bring the elixir of healing back home to heal the body, to heal our communities, to heal our economic system? That's the more feminine aspect. And so I just like the myth in general that brings all the gods and goddesses back to life.
Book number 6, and this is another one that after I read what you wrote about it, I've been discussing this one with my friends. The Heroine's Journey, Woman's Quest for Wholeness by Maureen Murdoch, published in 1990.
Well, I read that. I can't remember how the book came into my hands, but I read that when I was in my 40s, and I had 4 kids at home, and I had a very bad case of Lyme disease, and I was very sick. And I was struggling. I had a private therapy practice. I was writing my books, and I couldn't figure out how to heal myself. And she described in that book how women become masculinized when they go after career, and they get run by the career, which was definitely true of me at the time. And often in midlife, they have some kind of health crisis that is about bringing them back into their inner world, into their feminine again. And the book just hit me right between the eyes. It was like, I felt like it was written for me. And as a therapist, I actually gave it to many of my clients over the years, that I recognize the same syndrome. So I'm not alone in this whatsoever, but it really moved the needle in my life toward my healing. And
did you notice among your clients whether this applied more to women who were in a career that required them to be working for some kind of corporation where they're, every day up against the men, or women who had started their own businesses?
Either one, because I think
It was the
even
same.
to women who started their own businesses, they were doing everything. They were raising their children, they were doing the businesses, they were doing it on a shoestring budget, working overtime, and they were losing their feminine contact with that feminine soul.
So how did you encourage your clients, to move beyond that?
Well, by putting them, I didn't say don't do this, but instead bringing up the connection with the internal world, with the world of feelings, with the world of the soul, the world of myth, the world of the imagination. As I put them more in touch with that, there was more balance. I didn't really mess with how they were doing their career. That would take care of itself, but it was bringing up what was rejected and bringing that back to consciousness and fullness again. And then that has more balance. There's nothing wrong with us pursuing a career. It's when it's out of balance with our personal life.
Yeah, for sure. So book number 7 is Leadership and the New Science, Discovering Order in a Chaotic World. Right now, by Meg Wheatley, published in 2006.
Yes, this book was it was sort of like the self-organizing principle. It just went boing and put a lot of things together for me. When I was writing my book, The Global Heart Awakens, I would sit with in meditation with a question: what is the next organizing principle for humanity? Because that's what I was trying to write about. As I looked at evolution, the self-organizing universe, how do we organize? Well, we were organized by top-down power over structures, and now we were going into a new organizing system, a new operating system, if you will. And I kept sitting with that, asking in meditation to be guided. And Meg Wheatley's book fell into my lap when I was at a retreat center teaching a workshop, and they had a library, and I wanted to get away from everybody and have lunch to myself. So I went in the library, and this book was kind of sticking out on the shelf, and I picked it up and I just started reading it, and it was like, oh my God, she's answering my question. This is all about self-organizing systems in social structures and how we reorganize. And she matches the whole issue of leadership and business into the way evolution self-organizes. And somehow it just gave me the answers I was looking for in the book I was writing.
Isn't it interesting how that always happens? Just when we're looking for the keys, up they pop.
That's right. That's right. And people tell me that's happened to them with my books too,
Yeah. That's the beauty of books. Okay, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back in about 3 minutes' time with more from Dr. Anodea Judith.
Oh.
Stay tuned.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Dr. Anodea Judith, Book 8, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation by Paul Hawken. Now, this book really impressed you, didn't it?
Oh, this book gave me hope. And I love Paul Hawken's work. I've read most everything he's written. He's such a beautiful environmentalist, and here he addresses climate change. And I had read Drawdown, which preceded this book, about how we draw, about how really we can't retool our whole civilization in time to save us from climate change. So we have to figure out of how to get the carbon out of the atmosphere. That's what Drawdown was. And that was a very impressive book. But this book, it's not literal poetry, but it was poetry to me. It was singing the poetry of nature. He goes into one ecosystem after another and talks about how when humanity stops doing the bad things to it, it regenerates on its own. And marshlands are restored, and oceans are restored, and boreal forests are restored, and how that regeneration by itself is drawing climate out of the air. And I really feel this book should be in every legislator's hand, every elected representative, every high school teacher, every college. Everybody should read this book. It's the most hopeful book about climate change that I have read, and I've read a lot of books on climate.
So is he saying then that, there are so many organisations, there are so many protesters, we've got a lot going on in England right now, all over the world. Really, the answer all lies in one word: stop.
Well, yes, and that's easier said than done to stop. I mean, we have this tremendous momentum in the culture, but it's that nature does have an intelligence and a way. And when we simply stop interfering, she fixes herself.
We saw this, didn't we, in the pandemic?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's really and he goes, and it's just beautiful pictures. Each ecosystem is maybe, 1 to 3 pages. And it's just singing the poetry of nature, the magnificence of what nature does. For example, they had started killing wolves in Yellowstone National Park, and then everything started collapsing. And when they reintroduced the wolves, then the populations come into balance. The trees came back. We shouldn't mess with it. She knows what she's doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. She knows a lot more than we do. Yeah. And we'll survive long after we do.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Book number 9 is Bioenergetics, the revolutionary therapy that uses the language of the body to heal the problems of the mind. Alexander Lowen, 1975.
Yeah, now this is an old book, and he wrote many, many books, of which I've read all of them. I was a bioenergetic therapist, and when I experienced my first bioenergetic session, one that was done to me, it was such a revelation. I said, I have to study this work. And so I studied all the somatic therapists I could find, and Alexander Lowen, his whole theory of the body and how the body reflects our inner psychology, and our inner psychology shows up in the body, became really my work that I teach in my workshops and did in my therapy practice that I had for 20 years. And so that book is kind of his more basic book that sums up all his other books, And that would be, people say, well, what book would you recommend about bioenergetic therapy as a place to start learning about it? That's the one I would point to. Yeah.
So what would happen in a bioenergetic session, the first session?
Well, I watch the life force or charge within a person as they talk about their issue. They might talk about their ex-husband or their mother or some trauma. I watch where it is in the body. It's really a body-based psychotherapy, and that the language of the body, which was another title of one of his books, that the body is actually holding all the conditioning that you got from childhood. And he took from Wilhelm Reich, into 5 different character structures and analyzed each of them, like the endurer, he calls that the masochist. They're kind of holding in and hunkering down. And then the schizoid is up in their head all the time. And the psychopath is the one that's, really dominating and loud. And The oral is the one that's needy and clingy and wants to eat all the time. And the rigid is the one that wants to do everything perfectly. So he outlined those, and I put those in a couple of my books, and I work with them in my workshops. So how do we undo our character armor to really come more deeply into our essence?
What do we have to do?
Well, you can work with the breath, you can work with different postures, you can work with ways that dynamically move energy through the body. And as that energy moves into the body, it'll move up against whatever the block is. Maybe the block is in your throat and someone gets triggered, and all of a sudden their voice becomes very little. And that's because everything is constricting there. And then I know, oh, it's the throat chakra. They have to open that up, or their heart gets really tight, or they get a knot in their gut. And I follow that and, kind of unwind it to find out what emotional and psychological material is dwelling in that part of the body.
Well,
And then
I want to come back to that word charge after we've finished the last book, because that is the title of one of your books, and I want to know more about that. Book number 10, a classic, The Artist's Way: A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity by Julia Cameron, and that was published in 1992, and still people are talking about this book.
Well, it is a classic, and I haven't done it professionally. Well, I did in my younger years. I tried to make a living as an artist professionally. That was in my 20s, but then I gave that up. But I have always been an artist by hobby. And if you saw my house and my property, there's art all over. My partner is an artist. We create art together. So the Artist's Way was about how to stay inspired. How to let your unconscious come out, your morning pages that you write, which is your journal writing, that just kind of is your morning dump to clear your mind before you sit down and write your book. And going on an artist date once a week, going to a museum, going to a concert, going to a play. We have to stay inspired by witnessing each other's art. And, my partner and I will say, hey, we haven't had an artist date in a while. Where do you want to go? There's a new show at such and so. Let's go see that. And I always come home inspired.
Yeah. Well, my, inspiration is books, and listening to people like you telling me about the books that inspired them, because there's a mountain list of books that I need to read, and I'm sure many of our viewers too, every time we hear about them. So that completes your 10 best list. I want to talk about you and your work before we get into some of your books. In your keywords, you said that you are a weaver of ways. Tell me what that means.
Well, I think that if I even define my life purpose, it is to heal what has become separate in the culture. Masculine and feminine has become separate. Mind and body have become separate. In my therapy work, it was always uniting mind and body again. Spirit and matter have been separate. Most spirituality is all about spirit and denies matter, but I think matter is a beautiful thing that we can organize and make beauty. So it is about healing the splits in these archetypal realms. Not that I alone think I'm going to do that, but that's what I address in my books, in my clients, in my workshops. So it's bringing it back into unity and wholeness once again.
That's lovely. That's really lovely. So Wheels of Light and Eastern Body, Western Mind, I mean, these are books that, wow, they have become classics. When you first wrote these books, did you have any idea of how big they would become?
Well, first of all, it's Wheels of Life.
Life. Yes,
another book by another author. But Wheels of Life was my first book. And I will tell you that when I learned to write on that book, it took me 10 years to write it, but I had a baby in the middle of it, and, a lot of Wheels of Life interfered. But really, wild horses couldn't carry me away from writing that book. I just wanted to work on it a lot. That hasn't happened until my most recent project, but that one it did. And I didn't know what it would do at that time. I sent it to several publishers who turned it down. I was saying that all the chakras have equal importance, even the lower ones, and some of the male theorists saying, "Oh, that's BS." How could she say that grounding is important? But really, people have proved me right as the years have gone by. Yes, we do need to get into the body. Yes, we do need to ground. So no, I had no idea, but it was not a question about whether that was mine to do. I knew it was.
Yeah. And Eastern body, Western mind?
Yes, so I wrote that 10 years later, and that was in the height of my therapy practice, so I was seeing many clients and I was seeing the chakra issues parade through my clients. I was seeing that the developmental stages where they had trouble or trauma or they lost a parent or whatever happened, how that corresponded to the way their power functioned or the way their relationships functioned or the way they communicated or their ability to be in touch with their emotions or in their body. All the things that correlate to the chakras, I saw correlated to these developmental stages of personality. And so that came really out of all my clients, and some of their stories are told there with the names mixed up and some of the details mixed up, but some of the stories. And I remember one time I said, today I'm going to write about the endurer character structure, what Alexander Lowen calls the masochist. And I just sat and meditated about it. And then I had a brand new client coming in and I said, wouldn't it be something if she were the endurer? And she walked in and everything I had just written, I said, this is how they present. She presented. I feel stuck. I feel helpless. I feel futile. I feel depressed. She had the same kind of body that I was describing. It was like she walked off the page and into my office.
Those kinds of synchronicities I was discussing a few weeks ago with Dr. Bernard Beitman, who's doing a lot of research into synchronicities. Do you think that you created that experience because of wouldn't it be nice? Or do you think, was it your intention that created that? Or do you think that somehow some part of you knew that she was coming into your field and, the work that you were looking at that day created itself around that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I know that you and I got a chance to meet personally in Sedona recently when I was at this Holo Movement conference, and based on some of the work of physicist David Bohm. And he would answer that question the same way I would, which is it isn't cause and effect that I caused it or she caused me, but there's an underlying unity that caused both of us.
Yes.
And that's what I would attribute it to. I know that I used to paint in interior murals, especially a lot of skyscapes on ceilings, and I would paint clouds all day. And then I'd go out I'd finish my day and I'd go outside and I'd look up at the sky and there was exactly what I painted. And I wasn't even looking at the sky when I was doing it. It was like, does nature follow art or does art follow nature? Well, I think there's an underlying unity. It's like if I have water up to here and you see my fingers as separate, well, you don't see underneath that they're all connected to a hand and that I can move my fingers simultaneously from the hand that is the unifying factor.
Good answer. You're absolutely right. Tell me about your book, The Global Heart Awakens.
Well, this is what I consider my best book. It's the one I spent 10 years writing it. I did so much research. I put so much into it. Unfortunately, it's the least known. It sold the least, but the people who did read it absolutely loved it. And it charts history from the discovery of fire up to the modern era. And it puts it on a developmental schema similar to the development of childhood. That we were in our cultural infancy, and then we were in our cultural toddlerhood. And then the last 5,000 years, we've been in sibling rivalry. And now we are in our adolescence, undergoing our initiation into adulthood as a culture, as a society, as a world. And I call that the excuse me, the subtitle is Humanity's Rite of Passage from the Love of Power to the Power of Love. And this is where that question about organizing principles. We were organized by power, someone on top tells somebody else what to do, and they tell the people below them what to do, and it's a hierarchy all the way down. That's been our organizing principle since we first went into civilization, into cities and established, cultures. And we're moving to an organizing principle based on the power of love, which is more egalitarian, which is more compassionate, which is more collaborative, cooperative. And I believe that the crises on the planet are forcing us to collaborate and cooperate because we won't solve it any other way.
No, and it's interesting how, the division, we are seeing like both ends of the spectrum, so much more violence on the planet. But that in itself is for other people, it's making them more aware, more conscious of the need to not be violent, to be kind and compassionate with one another.
But the violence is nothing compared to what it was in the Middle Ages and, World War II. And, there's a book by Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Better Angels, I think it's called, or maybe Better Angels of Our Nature. And he actually looks through history at the prevalence of violence, everything from wars to domestic violence to street violence, and argues that it's really on the decline. We're just more aware of it now.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we get more access to the news about it, don't we?
That's right.
We wouldn't have heard of it about it before.
Yeah.
It was able to happen silently. So your latest project, She Rises, Awakening Our Female Archetypes of Leadership. Beautiful card deck. Tell us about this and the inspiration for it.
Well, during the pandemic, when my traveling business of traveling and teaching workshops, I was traveling all over the world, that came to a stop because all the retreat centers closed down and the live workshops were not happening. I said, well, I just want to do something that's fun. I had all this wisdom about archetypes from studying Joseph Campbell and Gareth Hill and some of the authors we've talked about. I saw that in my clients. I helped them awaken to their archetypes of power. And I said, I'm going to do something a little more fun, bring the right and left brain together, the word and the image together, and do a card deck. And rather than have little bitty cards and then a book where you refer to the right page and find out what the card means, I developed these as like greeting cards that have all the writing that would be in the book inside the cards. So each archetype is told from the point of view of I, she, and you. And I is the archetype speaking directly to you. She is the intellectual information about that archetype, either her story historically or her standing in the world today. Some of them are emerging archetypes that are just coming into vogue now. Some of them are ancient archetypes we've lost. And then the you is how it pertains to you when you work with that archetype or when the person works with that card. And I've turned that into a training, into live performances, and having great fun with this.
Tell me about live performances.
Well, for my 70th birthday, just as this was about to be published, it was released, 2 days before, I decided that I would take these archetypes to the stage. And I got 17 women to learn and memorize the archetypes and create a costume. And a man friend of mine, Gary Malkin, created music for each one that was the walk-on music and the music underlying. And they spoke the I portion. Like I am the priestess and I live to serve and I am a living conduit of the goddess, or I am the empath and I feel when the world has forgotten to feel itself, or I am the mother and I am the nurturer giving birth to life. So they acted these out on stage with live music and costumes and lights and all that. And that's what I did for my 70th birthday.
Very cool. Very cool. How many cards are there in the deck?
There's 38.
38. And each card looks like a card. Have you thought about selling those individually? Because wouldn't it be great for people to have the opportunity to pick one and send it to a friend?
Yes, actually, that's a great idea. I have thought about it. I haven't done anything about it yet, but I have thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that would be quite popular. Yeah. Mm. So what is next for you?
Well, I have just signed a contract to write a book about the goddess, about goddess religion and goddess mythology. So I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to do that, but I was, as an ordained priestess that was sworn to serve the goddess 40 years ago. I realized that, and it's funny, I had just was cleaning my office and I found a notebook where I had started a book writing about the goddess. I'd written about 4 chapters. And I looked through it and I said, you never did anything with this. And a few weeks later, I was on a Zoom call with someone. I was sent into a breakout room. It happened to be a publisher. She wanted to know about my She Rises that I had just published. And she said, I have a book that I want you to write. And so it came to me without looking. And so I said, okay, I guess I'm meant to do this. So that's my next project.
A book whose time has come, indeed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you a question about Hollow Movement and the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, since I was recently introduced to it and met some of you there. What is the, well, I understand what the purpose of it is, but what emerges from it, from the organization? What sort of, projects are being created?
Oh, well, in the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, and that's part of the Source of Synergy Foundation, there are several synergy groups. And I think there's, 12 or 15 of them now, where like one of them is on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Other ones are on the Hola movement, or on, there's even one about ETs, that people are into that. There's several different ones. And so each one of those is actually doing things in the world. Some of the people are producing the World Unity Week. People have foundations. People are addressing climate change. There's a lot of movers and shakers. And they were at that conference on the Hola movement, which is, the idea of that is it's a movement of movements. We've had the women's movement, and we've had the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Occupy movement. And these are all sub-movements, but this is based on what David Bohm said was the underlying unity of all reality. And he called it the Hola movement, that underlying unity, that it's always moving and changing form from this to that, but there's always an underlying unity. And so the movement of movements is based on David Bohm's philosophy of consciousness and matter and how they work together as one unified field. And the idea is, if we really understood that there is no separation, that everything is unified, we would behave differently.
Of course we would, yeah. So
Yes.
Which synergy are you involved in?
Well, I'm not in one at the moment. I've been too busy with all my work to actually join one, but it might be I would join the one with the Hola movement, or I would start my own on the Global Heart.
And what would that look like?
Well, it would look like doing research into where these heart-based principles are being applied and what the results are. For example, universal basic income, helping out those who are having a hard time by giving them something that gives them a leg up. Well, that's been implemented in different areas with great success. So people that are really tracking these things, where more collaborative, more compassionate practices are being developed, and what happens as a result.
Now, that is something that we need to know a lot more about. We hear so much bad news. We do not hear much about, the good things that are happening. And I think it gives people a lot of hope and encouragement to start their own, events or endeavors, if they
That's
know
right.
that there are others out there that are really successful. So
Well, in another one of Paul Hawkins' books, the name will come to me in a moment, but he said the largest movement in the history of humanity, the largest movement on the planet today, is people forming their own non-governmental organizations to address environment, social change, consciousness, peace, things like that. That's the biggest movement in humanity right now, and he charted all of that. And I'm sorry, the title's not coming to me in the moment, but it was one of his earlier books.
Because I think that's the biggest problem that we all have, is we all want to do something, but we
That's right.
don't know what to do or how to do it or where to do it.
Yes, another author, Andrew Harvey, said, whatever is breaking your heart is where your service lies. So if you have your heart broken by what's happening to the rainforest, that's where your service lies. If you have your heart broken over what's happening to the children, that's where your service lies. That we can look up, we got this thing called the internet, we can look up whatever it is and find organizations that are already doing it. I think we don't need to create a lot more little organizations. We need to organize the ones that are created into larger organizations. But there's, these organizations need volunteers, they need money donated. It's already happening. We just need to join in with that and help that become a movement of movements, a holo movement toward wholeness.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Anodea Judith, thank you so much for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. It was really a delight to talk about all my favorite authors and revisit them again. It was a fun project. I pulled books all off the bookshelf and they were piled up on the floor. Which one am I going to recommend? It was a hard choice to get it down to 10.
Yeah, that's what people say. And it always seems to be a very worthy project because people find so much that they didn't expect to find in the process.
Yes, that's right. I did too.
Yeah. Okay, well, for more information on Dr. Anodea Judith's work, you can check out how to track and balance your charge. We didn't talk about charge, which is something, if you've got a few moments, I really do want to cover. So tell me a little bit about charge.
But Charge in the Energy Body is a book about the life force and the inner psychology of your life force. Why do people have too much energy and they're anxious? Why do they have too little and they're depressed? How does it get trapped in the body? How do you free it up? How does charge work out in relationship when your partner says something and all of a sudden you're charged and defensive? How do we diffuse that? So it's all about the life force and how it's shaped by our programming and how to undo that and free up the life force through the chakras, through character structure, relationship, and more.
So you have on your website how to track and balance our personal charge. What does that entail?
The first step is awareness. Most people aren't even aware of their charge. They are activated and defensive, but they're not even aware that they are. So say, as a therapist, I would say, oh, I see you have a lot of charge on this issue. And that's why I use the word charge rather than prana. You have a lot of charge on your ex-husband still. You have a lot of charge on this issue with your father. Where is that in your body? And to say, oh, well, it's kind of stuck in my heart. It's kind of stuck in my throat. It gives me a headache. Oh, my legs are shaking. It would be different things for different people. And then, let's put our attention there. And what does that charge want to do? Oh, it wants to speak up, or it wants to reach out, or it wants to run away, or it wants to hide. And how can we let that charge complete its journey so that it is then freed up to not go into blockages, but into aliveness? Because I think ultimately we're all seeking our aliveness.
One thing that I have noticed recently, and I'm noticing it more frequently and in greater numbers, is people, I used to notice it in men, not women, but now I'm seeing it in both genders, who, when they are sitting anywhere, have one leg that is constantly tapping. And I was in a doctor's surgery the other day and there were 4 people. All of them were doing it. And sitting in the airport, there were lots of people doing it. And it's like, what is going on here?
Well, that's an attempt to discharge. When people are nervous, they want to do something to discharge. Being nervous is having a heightened charge. And so they can, we discharge through our limbs, through our voice, and through our genitals. But as a therapist, I didn't work with that aspect. But, you can stomp and the feet is just one place that they probably actually want to run away, but they're there for an appointment, so they're discharging through their legs.
So it's a kind of anxiety thing.
That's right. It's a kind of release valve for anxiety.
Okay.
If you told them to stop it, their anxiety would go up.
Yes. Yeah. And the
because they
fact
couldn't.
that I'm seeing a lot more of it, suggests that many more people are having to discharge that energy.
Yes. Well, I think in the pandemic, when we were all closed in and not out and socializing and out in the world, that the anxiety built up and needed to be released. And so people
Yes.
have more of it. Yeah.
Well,
They need charge.
people can learn more about your book, Charge and the Energy Body, and they can also go to your website, track and balance their own. And of course, they can check out and purchase She Rises, Awakening Our Female Archetypes of Leadership. And the website, 3 websites you can go to, AnodeaJudith.com, sacredcenters.com, and SheRisesMovement.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 Best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you to Dr. Anodea Judith.
Thank you, Sandy.